London, Sempacipactu. An aging man stands before a map of South America, his silver hair catching the candlelight. One day, he whispers, this continent will be free. His name is Francisco de Miranda, the visionary who lit the first fire of revolution, long before Bolivar. Caracas, mid-June of its century, a colonial city of cobbled streets, sugar estates, and the ever-watchful eyes of Spain. In Senti de Aguju, Francisco de Miranda was born into a wealthy Creole family. His father, Sebastian de Miranda, a prosperous merchant of the Canary Islands. His mother, Francisca Antonia Rodriguez, a woman of local blood and quiet intelligence. The boy grew up, surrounded by privilege, but also by humiliation. Despite their wealth, his family was barred from the highest offices of the colony. Those were reserved for Spaniards born in Europe. It was Miranda's first lesson in the invisible cage of empire. He was a restless child, a boy who devoured books, while others chased kites through the palm-lined courtyards. At 10, he was already reading Plutarch's Lives and The Spirit of the Laws. He learned French and English to read Voltaire and Rousseau in their own words. He would walk through the port and watch Spanish ships unload gold and cocoa, wondering why the wealth of his land always sailed away, never stayed. One day, he asked his father, why must a man born here bow to one born there? His father, fearing Spanish ears, told him to be silent. But that question rooted itself deep in Miranda's soul. It was not rebellion, yet only the beginning of a wound that would grow with every injustice he witnessed. By the time he entered the University of Caracas, he was already an outsider. The son of a Creole merchant could never be accepted among the colonial elite. Yet he stood apart, not with bitterness, but with curiosity. He studied mathematics, philosophy, and geography, and spent long hours tracing maps of the world. The sea, to him, was not just a barrier, it was a bridge. When he walked along the coast, he would imagine the lands beyond. Europe's cities, the Enlightenment salons of Paris, the battlefields of distant revolutions. He once wrote in his notebook, if one man could stand upon the shore of Venezuela and gaze far enough, he would see the horizon of freedom. But in the eyes of Spanish authorities, Miranda was dangerous. He read too much, spoke too freely, and questioned too deeply. The governor warned his family, your son's mind is too sharp for a colony. And so, with the weight of both pride and exile, Miranda left Caracas. He was 21, leaving behind the land he loved, to find the meaning of freedom across the ocean. He didn't yet know that his journey would make him a soldier, a wanderer, and a prophet of independence, and that his exile would become the seed of liberation for a whole continent. Madrid, census decreed. The young man from Caracas now wore the crimson uniform of the Spanish crown. His epaulets were polished, his posture rigid, but his eyes still searched beyond the orders of his superiors. He joined the Spanish army because it was the only path for a Creole to rise, and perhaps to understand the power he meant to challenge. His first campaigns took him to Morocco, where the hot wind carried the stench of powder and blood. He learned how soldiers lived and died for causes they scarcely understood. Yet Miranda's mind was never still. Between battles, he read the philosophers he carried in his pack-lock, Montesquieu and Paine. He began to see that empires were not built on strength alone, but on ignorance. When war erupted between Britain and its American colonies, Spain sent troops to assist the rebels. Miranda volunteered eagerly, sensing history's pulse beneath the gunfire. In the fields of Florida and the Caribbean, he fought alongside men who called themselves Americans, men who believed in liberty, not monarchy. He listened to their songs of freedom, their speeches of equality, and felt something awaken within him. In Senti de Aguju, he met General George Washington in person. The two men spoke briefly, a soldier from the New World and a general who had just created one. Miranda never forgot it. I have seen, he later wrote, the embodiment of reason armed with courage. If such a man can make a nation free, perhaps others can too. The American victory left an imprint on him that no Spanish medal could erase. He began to dream of applying that same fire to South America, but his ideas soon drew suspicion. Spanish officers accused him of secret sympathies with the rebels. His books were searched, his correspondence seized. The inquisitors whispered his name in dark corners. El criollo peligroso, the dangerous Creole. Miranda fled Spain in centefactas, taking with him maps, notes, and a restless heart. He crossed the Atlantic not as a loyal soldier, but as a man reborn, a traveler in search of freedom's anatomy. He had worn the uniform of empire. Now he would dedicate his life to dismantling it. In his journal, he wrote a single line before leaving Cadiz. No empire is eternal, but the idea of liberty might be. From the moment he left Spain, Francisco de Miranda became a citizen of nowhere and of everywhere. For the next 2 decades, he drifted between continents and revolutions, collecting ideas like other men collected medals. In London, he debated with scholars and statesmen about the rights of man. In Paris, he dined with Lafayette and listened to whispers of an impending French uprising. In New York, he spoke of a future where the entire hemisphere would break its chains. He carried with him notebooks filled with meticulous drawings of fortresses, essays on human rights, and letters addressed to kings and philosophers alike. They began to call him El Precursor, the forerunner. But to many, he was also an enigma. He was too liberal for monarchists, too aristocratic for republicans, and too visionary for his own time. His charm was undeniable. A man fluent in 5 languages, at ease in courts and in cafes, who quoted Rousseau and discussed tactics with generals. Yet, behind his eloquence, there was solitude. He wrote in his diary, "Those who fight for humanity must learn to live without a home." When the French Revolution erupted in Sensti, the Akpach du Q, Miranda saw in it the promise of the world he had dreamed of. He joined the French army as a general, commanding troops at the northern frontier. For a brief moment, his ideals and history aligned. A Creole from Venezuela, fighting under the banner of liberty, equality, fraternity. But revolutions devour their children. Suspicion fell upon foreigners, and Miranda, once a hero, was accused of treason. He was arrested in Sensti Picu Jusan, imprisoned in the dungeons of the terror. In that darkness, he began to understand that freedom could become as ruthless as tyranny. "Liberty," he wrote from his cell, "feeds upon its own flesh, yet remains the only meal worth dying for." After his release, Miranda wandered again, Paris to Hamburg, Amsterdam to London. His faith in revolution did not die. It evolved. He no longer believed freedom would come from chaos or swords alone. It would need preparation, unity, and vision, a plan greater than any single rebellion. He began drafting what he called Colombia, a vast manuscript outlining the future republic of Latin America, complete with constitution, flag, and anthem. In cafes and libraries, he imagined a continent reborn, the Colombian Federation, stretching from the Mississippi to Patagonia, governed not by kings but by laws. To most Europeans, he was a dreamer lost in fantasies. To Miranda, he was building the blueprint of destiny. And yet, destiny is never gentle. The world saw him as a wanderer, a man without nation or command. But in his solitude, the fire only grew stronger. The more he saw of empires, the more he knew. They could all be broken. By the dawn of the 20th century, Miranda's mind had turned into a forge of revolution. In his modest London apartment, surrounded by maps and ink-stained papers, he worked tirelessly on what he called El Proyecto Americano, the American project. The goal was not just independence, but unity. He envisioned a single confederation of all former Spanish colonies, with a representative government, equal rights, and a shared identity. On his desk lay a piece of silk, the prototype of a flag divided into 3 bands: yellow for the wealth of the land, blue for the ocean that linked its peoples, and red for the blood of sacrifice. That flag, born from imagination in exile, would later become the foundation of Venezuela's, Colombia's, and Ecuador's national banners. Miranda was not content to dream, he planned. He wrote to the British Prime Minister, to the American Congress, to any power that might support his cause. "We seek not vengeance against Spain," he wrote, "but the liberty of men born upon her soil." Yet the European courts saw him as a nuisance, a romantic idealist, chasing impossible storms. Still, Miranda persisted. He believed the time was near. The Napoleonic Wars had weakened Spain. Its colonies were restless. Its people, inspired by the revolutions in America and France, had begun to whisper of independence. He only needed a spark. In Sempach Bekrot, Miranda assembled a small group of exiles and mercenaries in Haiti. They boarded 2 ships, carrying his new flag and the dream of a free Venezuela. "We go," he declared, "not as conquerors but as liberators." On June Nishirfta, his men landed on the Venezuelan coast and raised the yellow-blued banner, the first unfurling of independence in South America. But the people did not rally. Fear and loyalty to the crown ran deep. Spanish forces attacked swiftly, scattering Miranda's men. Many were killed or captured. Miranda barely escaped with his life, retreating to the Caribbean before returning to London in defeat. Still, he refused to surrender his faith. In his letters from exile, he wrote, "Failure does not kill an ideal. It teaches it to wait." He knew history would not move at the pace of one man's will. But he also knew, once lit, a flame cannot choose where it spreads. Somewhere, somehow, the fire he had struck would find air. The Caribbean. Sempach Bekrot, Francisco de Miranda, now 56, stood at the helm of a small vessel called the Leander. Behind him, 2 more ships followed, carrying a few dozen men and a cargo of courage far greater than their arms. On the deck fluttered the flag he had designed, yellow, blue, and red, its colors bright against the tropical sun. It was not just a symbol, it was a prophecy. After decades of exile, he was returning home to ignite the first revolution of South America. His plan was both bold and desperate: land on the Venezuelan coast, rally the people, and declare independence. The time seemed ripe. Spain was crumbling under Napoleon's invasion, and the colonies were restless. But what Miranda underestimated was fear that silent weapon empires wield best. When his ships neared the port of Ocumer de la Costa, Spanish cannons opened fire. The sea erupted in smoke. Miranda's men fought valiantly, but most were captured or drowned. He fled, regrouped, and tried again weeks later, landing at Coro with fewer men but the same determination. There, on Sempach Bekrot Watskemika, he raised the tricolor flag for the first time on Venezuelan soil. It was a moment of pure symbolism. A man standing on the edge of history, holding a dream that no one yet believed in. He read aloud his Declaration of Independence. "The chains of the New World shall be broken, and the sons of America shall be free." But no crowds came. The townspeople locked their doors. The priests warned that rebellion was sin. To them, Miranda was not a hero, but a madman tempting divine wrath. Within days, Spanish troops descended upon Coro. The rebellion collapsed. Many of Miranda's men were executed, others sent to rot in colonial prisons. Once again, he escaped by sea, his tricolor flag hidden beneath his coat. Back in London, he was greeted not with ridicule, but with pity. The newspapers called him the South American Don Quixote. Yet, even in failure, his conviction did not waver. He spent his nights drafting letters to old allies, reworking his maps, and collecting intelligence from across the Americas. He was certain the next generation would succeed where he could not. In one of his final London notebooks, he wrote words that would outlive him. "Revolutions are not born from victories, but from persistence. Defeat teaches men the language of freedom." And so he waited, the exiled visionary, watching from afar as the world he dreamed of inched toward reality. What he did not yet know was that his patience was about to be rewarded not by fate, but by a young man who had come to inherit his fire. London, Sempach Bekrot. The city was gray, its streets slick with rain and smoke. Francisco de Miranda, old and weary, lived quietly in a modest house at Newshersteed, Grafton Street. Books and maps covered every surface. Yet, even in solitude, he remained a figure of quiet magnetism, the ghost of revolutions past. One afternoon, a knock came at his door. Standing outside was a young Venezuelan aristocrat, tall, proud, his eyes burning with conviction. His name was Simón Bolívar. For Bolívar, Miranda was a legend, the man who had dared what no one else would. For Miranda, Bolívar was the embodiment of his hope, youth, energy, and the promise of a new age. The two men spoke for hours. Bolívar told him of the growing unrest in Caracas, of secret meetings and the whispers of rebellion. Miranda listened, silent at first, then rose and unfurled his old flag. "This," he said, "was once raised upon our soil. It fell, but its colors still breathe." He placed Bolivar's hand upon the cloth. "If I cannot see freedom, perhaps you will." Bolivar replied solemnly, "I will not betray your dream." That moment was the passing of a torch, one generation's struggle becoming another's destiny. Miranda gave Bolivar his maps, his correspondence, and a lifetime of lessons in both hope and caution. He warned him that revolutions are built on sacrifice, not glory. "The enemy will not only kill you," he said, "they will make your friends fear you." Soon after, Bolivar returned to Venezuela, carrying with him Miranda's vision. When the junta of Caracas declared independence in April, they sent ships to bring Miranda home. After 40 years in exile, he stepped once more onto Venezuelan soil, the same shores where his flag had once fallen. This time, the people cheered. The air itself seemed to tremble with change. "At last," Miranda said, his eyes glistening, "the continent begins to awaken." He was 60 years old. The world he had dreamed of was finally stirring. Yet destiny, ever cruel, would grant him only a glimpse of triumph before plunging him back into tragedy. For in revolutions, even the prophets can become their own victims. Venezuela, Sempach, Dengzi. The city of Caracas rang with church bells and gunfire, the old order collapsing, the new still struggling to be born. After decades of exile, Francisco de Miranda finally saw his homeland break free from Spain's shadow. The Venezuelan Congress declared independence on July go, and the aging visionary was named Generalissimo Supreme Commander of the new Republic's army. For the first time in his life, Miranda had power. But power, like freedom, is never pure. He faced an impossible task, building a nation from chaos. The Republic had no experienced army, no unity, no allies. The land was divided, patriots against royalists, the wealthy against the poor, and worse, nature itself seemed to rebel. Earthquakes devastated Caracas in Sempach, and priests declared it a punishment for treason against the crown. The people's faith faltered. Superstition returned stronger than reason. Miranda fought on, leading exhausted soldiers through jungles and plains. The Spanish general Domingo Monteverde, supported by loyalists and terrified peasants, advanced relentlessly. By July, Caracas was surrounded. Starvation set in. Disease spread through the camps. Even his officers, among them, the fiery young Bolivar, began to lose faith. When the last fort fell, Miranda made a choice that would stain his name forever. To save the civilians of Caracas from massacre, he signed an armistice, surrendering the capital in exchange for peace. To him, it was an act of mercy. To others, it was betrayal. On the night of Sempach Pingjun Antigas Andrid, Miranda prepared to flee to Curaçao. He carried with him maps, letters, and the dreams of 40 years. But in the port of La Guaira, his own officers blocked his path. Among them stoed Simón Bolívar. Bolívar, his face pale with fury, accused him of treason. "You have sold Venezuela," he shouted. Miranda said nothing. He only looked at the young man he had once called his successor, and saw in his eyes the same fire that had once burned in his own. Bolívar gave the order. Soldiers seized Miranda, bound his hands in chains, and delivered him to the Spanish authorities. It was a betrayal that would haunt Bolívar for the rest of his life. But at that moment, he believed he was saving the revolution. As Miranda was led away, he murmured, "There is no ideal that man will not betray when fear is strong enough." The Spaniards took him aboard a ship bound for Puerto Cabello, then across the Atlantic. The visionary who had dreamed of liberty for all America was now a prisoner of the very empire he had defied. He left behind a nation divided, a cause bleeding, and a pupil who would one day finish his work, but never escape his shadow. Spain, Sempach, the fortress of La Caracas, rose from the mist like a tomb of stone and salt. It was here, in this desolate prison near Cadiz, that Francisco de Miranda was confined, stripped of his rank, his books, his maps, and even his name. He was not sentenced, for there was no trial. To the Spanish crown, he was too dangerous to execute, yet too famous to release. The cell was damp, the air heavy with rot and sea brine. Rats scurried through the straw where he slept. His hands, once steady over maps, now trembled from fever, but his mind remained unbroken. He began writing letters on scraps of paper to Bolivar, to his friends, to the world that had forgotten him. "Tell them," he wrote, "that dreams cannot be confined within walls. If they have not killed my ideas, then I am still alive." The guards called him El Loco Viejo, the old madman. Yet, in his solitude, he remained dignified. He refused to curse Bolivar or speak against those who had betrayed him. "He is young," Miranda told a fellow prisoner. "He will learn that freedom demands more from men than loyalty ever could." Years passed. His hair turned white, his eyesight dimmed. He prayed not for release, but for meaning. The outside world was changing. Napoleon had fallen. The revolutions in the Americas were spreading. The very thing he had dreamed of was unfolding beyond the prison walls, but no one came for him. Sometimes, the guards would hear him whisper through the night fragments of speeches, verses of liberty, maps traced in the air by trembling fingers. On the 4th anniversary of Venezuela's independence, he stood in the dim light and raised his shackled hands as if saluting an invisible flag. He had given everything: wealth, family, home, dignity for a future he would never see. But he never renounced it. "The body," he once wrote, "is Spain's prisoner. The soul remains America's." In his final years, the visionary faded quietly, like a candle burning down to its last ember. Yet that small light flickering in the dark corridors of La Caracha would outlast the empire that buried him. For when men forget the names of tyrants, they still remember the ones who dreamed. By Sempach Pijoro, Francisco de Miranda was no longer the fiery general or the visionary philosopher who had once debated kings and marched with revolutionaries. He was an old man, worn down by dampstone, isolation, and time. His prison in La Caraca had become both tomb and monastery, the place where he wrestled not with enemies, but with memory itself. He had been there for 4 years. The guards no longer feared him. They pitied him. His health failed, fevered lungs, trembling hands, a slow wasting away. Yet, even in weakness, he wrote, on bits of parchment and smuggled scraps, he continued drafting ideas for a free and united America. "The dream," he wrote, "does not die when the dreamer weakens. It waits, patient as dawn. No one visited, no trial was ever held." To Spain, he was already a ghost, an inconvenient reminder of a rebellion too vast to crush. His letters to Bolivar were never answered, perhaps they never arrived. Still, he refused to curse his former ally. To the last, he believed Bolivar would finish the work that he had begun. The guards later testified that in his final days, Miranda spoke softly to himself, repeating the word libertad, freedom, like a prayer. On Sempach Kugajoron and Siga Tumachnitz, he died in his cell. No priest attended, no family came. His body was buried in an unmarked grave near the fortress walls. The record of his death was a single line in a Spanish ledger. Francisco de Miranda, aged 66, deceased. But legends do not stay buried. Sailors who passed Cadiz said they sometimes saw a lone candle flickering through the prison window at night. The old general's soul, they whispered, still writing in the dark. Back across the Atlantic, the revolution he had ignited was now a wildfire. Bolivar marched through Venezuela with his army of liberation. The yellow blurred flag that Miranda had designed once trampled in defeat was raised again, this time over cities freed by blood. In the Andes, San Martin crossed mountains to do the same in the south. The man who had been mocked as the Quixote of freedom had become its first martyr. His name vanished from official proclamations, but his ideas lived on in the hearts of those who carried muskets and dreams. The old prisoner of Cadiz had died unknown, but the continent he had imagined was awakening, exactly as he had predicted. When news of his death reached London months later, an old friend said, "He died in silence, but his echo will fill centuries." When Simón Bolívar finally liberated Venezuela in Sempach Pequeño, the people filled the streets with color and song. Among the banners fluttering in the wind was one familiar flag, yellow, blue, and red. Bolívar ordered it to lead the parade. This, he said, was first raised by Miranda. The crowd, many of whom did not know the name, still cheered. By then, Bolivar had become the liberator, the hero of 5 nations. Yet even he confessed to friends that the victory was haunted by the memory of the man he once betrayed. Miranda, he said, saw farther than any of us. He dreamed before we dared to act. Miranda's legacy was not one of conquest, but of imagination. He was the first to think of Latin America as a single identity, a shared destiny. His Colombian federation may have remained unfinished, but its spirit lives in the flags, the constitutions, and the ideals of 100 million people who call that land home. Every revolution begins with someone who sees light where others see darkness. Miranda was that light. He was mocked, exiled, imprisoned, yet he never recanted. Even when the world called him mad, he remained steadfast in his belief that freedom is not granted by kings or decrees, but born from the courage to dream beyond one's lifetime. 2 centuries later, the tricolor still waves across the Andes and the Caribbean, the silent testimony of a man who never saw his own victory, yet ensured it would come. If history is a chain of torches passed from one hand to another, then Miranda was the first spark. Bolivar and San Martin carried his flame, but it was Miranda who dared to strike the match. And so, though his bones lie somewhere unknown beneath the Spanish earth, his true monument stands in every flag that bears his colors, in every cry of liberty that echoes through the Americas. Francisco de Miranda, the man who lit the first fire, so others could see the dawn.